So let's start with the next paper, Bojana, Jovićević. I think that this paper is very much taking up arguments from the meeting we had yesterday night, the talk we had yesterday night. So if you were there, you will see it does. Anyway, her paper seems to be, she is working on freier Wille. She is in her first year of postdoctoral studies. And I think also her paper might be an expression of freier Wille. So go ahead.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for organizing this wonderful event. So today I'm going to talk about perpetual peace as a capacity. Now, this is a work in progress, so it's going to be a bit raw and experimental, maybe in some parts argumentatively short, but I do hope, as one always does, that something will be transmitted. Okay. So, I want to consider the idea of perpetual peace as a capacity. The idea of perpetual peace I refer to is the distinctive way in which we, as rational finite beings, relate to and act towards one another, as Gattungswesen, as species being, and do so in order to establish a non-conflictual, peaceful coexistence within a specific form of social and political life. In this sense, perpetual peace is not a peaceful state of life we are thrown into, as we were give off and in pax aeternum, some sort of paradise on earth. Rather, it is an ongoing, perpetual activity among human beings aimed at achieving peace within life. As Kant says, perpetual peace is not a Naturzustand, but must be instituted, established, muss gestiftet werden by human beings. Now, it is true that Kant's quotation goes a bit different here. He doesn't say explicitly, perpetual peace is not a natural state. He says, within a natural state where human beings live next to each other, and that is a state of war, peace is something to be yet instituted or established. However, I don't think it makes a major difference for my argument. For what I want to say is that perpetual peace, for Kant, in whatever constellation we might coexist with each other previously, is not to be understood as a state, as a form of anything given. Okay, so this being said, yet the idea of perpetual peace resting on our activity, our exercise of it, is puzzling, even enigmatic. The difficulty arises from the very principle of perpetual peace itself, as we've just introduced it. It is a goal to be achieved, established, and therefore its concrete instantiations in time play no purchase here. As Kant puts it in the universal history within a cosmopolitan purpose, perpetual peace is a theoretical ideal, but one we need for practical purposes. That's what ought to be. Consequently, no number of concrete actions or examples could ever exhaust it, because its logical principle is inner, with nothing external to it. This is why it is an ideal. Now, this dissipates the idea that I introduced in the second paragraph, that formation of perpetual peace stems from concrete natural sources. The she who exercises it does so by virtue of her exercise being limited from without, externally. This is puzzling, for it suggests that finite, rational beings, in exercising perpetual peace, stand in discontinuity with the forms of nature. And it is enigmatic for who or what such a subject could be, if not a natural being. Now, this dilemma, the dilemma of either abandoning the idea of perpetual peace as a regulative, normative ideal finite rational beings strive to achieve, or a perpetual peace as an activity distinctive of natural human beings, is itself false. Of course, I just sketch it for the purposes of the argument. At the heart of it, I think, lies a dubious conception of what a perpetual peace is and what a human nature is. To tackle these questions, I will proceed in a very simple manner, drawing on Kant's remarks on the subject from Towards Perpetual Peace and the universal history with a cosmopolitan purpose or aim. I will first sketch the idea of perpetual peace as a static, harmonious natural state, an idea Kant explicitly denies or rejects. And then I will argue that this conception of perpetual peace is incoherent, for it fails to explain in a logical sense what this very idea of nature as a harmonious whole, according to its own propositions, is, and how perpetual peace even functions within it. So this is the first part. Then secondly, I will attempt to show how can we conceptually reconcile the idea that perpetual peace is both a regulative, normative ideal that guides our social and political actions, and yet an activity, concrete exercise. That these two are not mutually exclusive ideas, but two sides of one and the same concept, that of a capacity. To do this, I will introduce, of course, the idea of a capacity, or dynamis, to borrow Aristotle's term, or the Übung der Vernunft, but a Vernunft not separate from its actualization in a certain form of social life, to say it with Kant. Okay, so the first part, perpetual peace as a natural state. So, pardon me. Okay, let's just start straightforward. If we conceive of nature as an all-encompassing harmonious whole, governed by natural laws, where everything falls into its place or proper order, like the paradigmatic example of billiard balls in a mechanistic Anordnung or the arrangement, then no course of human action, however powerful, has jurisdiction to dislodge the authority that nature exerts over our finite, rational existence. As Kant writes, alle Naturanlagen eines Geschöpfes sind bestimmt, sich einmal vollständig und zweckmäßig zu entwickeln. Bei allen Tieren bestätigt dieses die äußere sowohl als innere oder zergliedernde Beobachtung. Ein Organ, das nicht gebracht werden soll, eine Anordnung, die ihren Zweck nicht erreicht, ist ein Widerspruch in der teleologischen Naturlehre. Denn wenn wir von jenem Grundsatz abgeben, so haben wir nicht mehr eine gesetzmäßige, sondern eine zwecklos spielende Natur. Und das trotzlose, ungefähr tritt an die Stelle des Leitfadens der Vernunft. End of the quote. Even more, we could say not only that we are powerless in face of nature, in this constellation, but whatever, so nature as this big harmonious whole, but whatever bad actions, evil deeds we perform within it, leaves the causality of nature itself unperturbed and has no consequences, since each and every action of ours, bad and wicked as it may be, can be reduced back to the principle of the causality of nature we partake in. So, in other words, no matter how bad we may act as natural beings in this scenario, our actions would still be considered good in the tautological sense, for if they were not good, they would simply cease to be. You know, good by the sheer way of being what they are. But in strict sense, as I will develop later, within this idea of nature, there is no such thing as good or evil, or war or peace. Nothing conceptually purchased here. Okay, so in this conceptual framework, by virtue of which nature is a form of harmonious totality, any deviation from it, say a bad action or malfunctioning state, would be merely privative, a relative difference to nature itself, and one that does not disturb the causality of nature, which, in this case, functions as an illimitable and boundless whole. Oh, this is the principle. So another way to put it would be, with Hegel, if nature is indeed, but I think Kant and Hegel come here together, if nature is indeed a harmonious, unperturbed whole, so some kind of lückenloses System, a state of perfect bliss or paradise, it is also paradoxically a pure animal kingdom, bereft of spirit, where no concept of good and evil, war and peace, conceptually purchase or even take place. As Hegel writes, paradise was that zoological garden in which man lived in an animal condition of innocence. But this is not his true destiny. Man is not truly a human being until he knows what goodness is, has experienced opposition, and became divided within himself. For he can only know what is good if he also has knowledge of evil. End of the quote. So human beings, by their very nature, are not who they are simply by adhering to natural laws, but through taking a distance, in the sense of committing an evil deed, doing a violent act, if you want, causing turbulence within state of nature as a harmonious whole. In relation to such an idea of nature can even take place or can be understood in the first place, as we will see later. In this sense, paradise is not the ideal state. It is an undeveloped, raw existence where only brutes and no human beings live. Now, Kant echoes a similar argument in the universal history with a cosmopolitan purpose when he speaks about the state of nature as an unperturbed harmony, a kind of pre-social paradise, whereas the state acts as the bad cop that seeks to discipline our Naturinstinct and natural instincts, which are in themselves presumed to be fully good. He dismisses this as a false presupposition, describing the idea either going toward the wild, the natural impulses, no matter how appealing or romantic it may be, is an untenable fantasy, So the alternative for Kant is not merely about giving up one's brutal freedom as a natural being and to seek peace and security in a lawful constitution. I quote Kant. So schwärmerisch diese Idee auch zu sein scheint und als eine solche an einem aber von Saint-Pierre oder Rousseau verlacht worden. Seine brutale Freiheit aufzugeben und in einer gesetzmäßigen Verfassung Ruhe und Sicherheit zu suchen. Pardon me. So, rather, this very alternative is itself false, failing to recognize what it itself threats upon, or we fail to recognize what it itself threats upon. Namely, two forms of the given, one of nature and the other of the state, that, however, can be seen as what they are and rendered intelligible only by and through the use of our reasoning. Moreover, Kant argues that to even speak of such an idea of harmony, of nature as a perfect pre-social state, or indeed of the state as a harmonious institution, or for that matter, as something natural, is always already the product of our Übung der Vernunft, rational capacity to reflect upon it, to distinguish ourselves from it, to impose reasoning upon any such form of the given or harmony. These are all, indeed, very nice and refined descriptions, but why would we need to do this? Why distance ourselves from nature as a harmony? Wouldn't it be nice to live in such a blissful paradise where all the wretched squalor and misery of humanity is gone? And what kind of opposition or distinction in conceptual sense do Kant and Hegel have in mind? Kant, it's true, Kant never speaks about opposition or distinction. He speaks about Zwietracht, discord, dissension, or strife within the idea of nature. So this is Kant's term. Hegel is opposition and distinction and so weiter. So, and I think there is a logical reason for the longer argument to be offered here, that both Kant and Hegel adhere to. So, if indeed nature is a state of unperturbed harmony, then what I think is at stake is that there is no external point of reference, no way to step outside it and reflect upon it. If everything I say or do as a human being takes part in nature's then there is no way to verify for me that means that this nature as a harmonious whole permeates each and every part of my being, then there is no way to verify whether the nature I take part of is truly something actual or merely a Hirngespinst, a fantasy, a story I made up. So in other words, if nature is so total that it pervades everything, its logical principle cannot be verified as actualized anywhere. Nature, as a form of complete harmony, is then always already on the verge of becoming completely unbestimmt, undetermined, since the principle of nature as this very harmonious whole, as we saw it, is itself conceptually corrupted. So, in order to even reflect upon this principle, to see it for what it is, we must take some distance from it by means that are themselves not inscribed into this very causality. And what are these means? Well, of course, by virtue of our reasoning. So, the distinction between nature as a harmonious whole and the fall of humanity, so-called fall of humanity, then is not an external contingent fact, but a result of our own ability to separate ourselves from nature, through the use of reason. This is not arbitrary. It's not like we can either say, oh, let's stay in a state of perpetual bliss of nature, or let's choose thinking, let's be thinkers. Rather, it is through this very capacity of exercising reason itself that nature qua nature, in its inner unfolding as a harmonious whole, can be rendered intelligible in the first place. This is the first time we can see it for what it is. And also, furthermore, our own nature becomes intelligible to us. Namely, that as natural beings, we are beings of reason, and we cannot establish this within the idea of unperturbed harmony, for we don't possess means, we're in no longer to see that this is nature out there and this is me relating to this nature, because once again, I am permeated by a nature from each and every part of my being. If my causality as a natural being and that of nature as a harmonious whole completely collide in a conceptual sense. Okay, so Kant expresses it like this. Am Menschen als dem einzigen vernünftigen Geschöpf auf Erden sollten sich diejenigen Naturanlagen, die auf den Gebrauch seiner Vernunft abgezielt sind, nur in der Gattung, nicht aber im Individuum vollständig entwickeln. Die Vernunft in einem Geschöpfe ist ein Vermögen. Hier. Die Regeln und Absichten des Gebrauchs aller seiner Kräfte weit über den Naturinstinkt zu erweitern und kennt keine Grenzen ihrer Entwürfe. Sie wirkt aber selbst nicht instinktmäßig, sondern bedarf Versuche, Übung und Unterricht, um von einer Stufe der Einsicht zur anderen allmählich fortzuschreiten. Daher würde ein jeder Mensch unmäßig lange leben müssen, um zu lernen, wie er von allen seinen Naturanlagen einen vollständigen Gebrauch machen solle. Oder wenn die Natur seine Lebensfrist nur kurz angesetzt hat, wie es wirklich geschehen ist, so bedarf sie vielleicht einer unabsehlichen Reihe von Zeugungen, deren eine der anderen ihre Aufklärung überliefert, um endlich ihre Keime in unserer Gattung zu derjenigen Stufe der Entwicklung zu treiben, welche ihrer Absicht vollständig angemessen sind. End of the course. Sorry, it's a long one, but beautiful, so I couldn't skip it. Now, okay, several consequences follow from what I said. So, first, to conceptualize nature qua nature is not to suggest that there is some harmonious whole out there with human beings acting in perfect accordance with its laws. Rather, nature itself, by its very logical principle, is shot through with blind spots, impurities, and chaos. It is conceptually torn, consisting of two elements that do not merely exist externally next to one another. So, harmony made in heaven on one side, and then our impulse of human nature, of what is specifically tied to human beings, to want to arrange everything according to our own will, as Kant says, alles bloß nach seinem Sinne richten zu wollen. These two elements, however, are mutually determined and are part of inner principle of what nature as such is. So, to make nature even intelligible, we must conceptualize it as inherently including the possibility for the exercise of human freedom and reasoning, meaning our ability to act and actualize ourselves as separate from this whole, and thus bring in the element of instability, unpredictability, and conflict that comes with it. In fact, to go with Kant, this is the only way in which nature, on the one hand, and phenomena such as culture, history, and education, a form of sociality of any kind, can first even come into being. Without conflict and division, no social life, no history, no culture, and no nature itself in the end could emerge. Now I quote Kant. Der Mensch will Eintracht, aber die Natur weiß besser, was für seine Gattung gut ist. Sie will Zwietracht, will gemachlich und vergnügt leben. Die Natur will aber, soll aus der Lassigkeit und untätigen Genugsamkeit hinaus sich in Arbeit und Mühseligkeiten stürzen, dagegen auch Mittel auszufinden, sich kluglich wiederum aus den Letzteren herauszuziehen. Die natürlichen Triebfedern dazu, die Quellen der Unseligkeit und des durchhängigen Widerstandes, woraus so viele Übel entspringen, die aber doch auch wieder zur neuen Anspannung der Kräfte mithin zu mehrerer Entwicklung der Naturanlagen antrieben. The quote goes on. It's also very beautiful. Applied to the idea of perpetual peace, now to go back to our thing, this means that peace cannot be simply a natural state that we merely fall into. It cannot be something that exists effortlessly or once and for all, because human nature, as it is essentially actualized within a certain form of social life, is marked by ungesellige Geselligkeit, also unsocial sociability, as Kant calls it. This internal struggle defines our species. It is only through an ongoing process and continual engagement with these tensions that the seed of human nature, Keim der menschlichen Natur, can truly develop. However, we have to be careful here. It is indeed true that conflict and struggle are constitutive of nature as such, and human nature, because we said these two elements go together, go hand in hand. But at the same time, these tensions are also not how things should be. If we remain in a state where evil actions, wickedness, all this discord, chaos are seen as a constitutive of peace itself, we risk, in some sense, repeating a form of causality I've talked about in the previous part, namely the unperturbed causality of second nature as a form of giveness, where the contradictions of human nature simply remain unresolved. We say, you know how it is, nature is not a state, it's not a harmony, but it's a dynamic process, and so on and so forth. So we need to be careful not to just stay here and say, this is it, because Kant is clear here. Still, although even conflict and violence is constitutive for peace, peace nevertheless should be striven for and achieved. In other words, while struggle and conflict are necessary conditions for human nature to unfold, they must be actively transcended for true peace, perpetual peace to emerge. Noch einmal, der Mensch will Eintracht, aber die Natur weiß besser, was für seine Gattung ist. Sie will Zwietracht. Okay, perpetual peace as a capacity. So what I offer here is not a solution, but rather another way of describing this tension between perpetual struggle, which is constitutive of the very idea of nature and development, and the human will as Gattungswesen, species being, to achieve peace as an ideal. So these two sides. These two ideas should, and indeed can, I think, be brought together within one and the same concept, that of perpetual peace as a rational capacity. Now, Aristotle's basic claim in the Metaphysics 9 is that rational capacities are not innate, but are developed through exercise. As he puts it, rational capacities do not come to us by nature, but are acquired by first exercising them. So, for Aristotle, the distinction between capacities we have by nature and those we must acquire by first exercising them is a logical distinction and not a temporal one, so it's not tied to time. In other words, Aristotle is not delineating between capacities we are equipped with at birth and those we acquire later throughout our lives. Rather, it is a distinction between two different ways of explaining what it means to possess a rational capacity. On the one hand, for Aristotle, some capacities cannot be explained separately from the acts that manifest them. For example, we don't acquire our voice by speaking, our legs by walking, our eyes by seeing, but it is because we have a voice that we are able to speak. It is because we have legs that we are able to walk. It is because we have eyes that we are able to see. These capacities are not dependent on practice to explain them the way they are. On the other hand, there are capacities that are explained only by and through the very acts in which they are exercised. For instance, we learn to make coffee by making it, playing football by playing it, and we become philosophers by engaging into philosophy. In these instances, the acquisition of capacity is intrinsically tied to the very act of exercise. This requires learning by doing, as we saw in Kant's quote, Übung, Unterricht. So rational capacities require learning by doing, a form of actualization, to put it in a more Kantian vocabulary, and we do not simply possess them by nature, but acquire them through our practical activity. So the process of acquiring, we could say, could be here reduced down to the act of learning. I think that something similar may be said about Kant's idea of perpetual peace. Namely, how? In order to achieve perpetual peace as a form of rational capacity, as an Übung der Vernunft, we must first exercise it, actualize it throughout praxis, within certain political and social infrastructures, if you will, yes. Of course, we can fail in this endeavor, as we can never be certain that the goal of perpetual peace will be fully realized. Our capacity for exercising peace is, to put it with Aristotle, two-way. It can be exercised for opposite purposes. So as medicine can be used to heal and hurt people at the same time, the capacity for perpetual peace can be used to establish peace, indeed, but it can also misrepresent itself, and it can be also used to justify böse and propagate wars. However, and I think this is important, this does not mean that we should stop trying or abandon the goal of perpetual peace. On the contrary, the very nature of reason allows us to expect that if there are grounds that conclusively prove our practice of perpetual peace to be wrong, they will not remain hidden from us for too long. This is what it means to exercise perpetual peace as a rational capacity in the first place. Capacity provides both foundation, ground, and actualization of its exercise. So it is not the failure to establish perpetual peace in concrete political and social situations that exhaust its exercise, but a continual striving not to stop trying to actualize it, to learn by doing, if you want, and getting our hands dirty, that can give us some hope. And I think a lesson from Kant and Aristotle, this is a lesson from Kant and Aristotle, which is more than just handy and not to be so easily dismissed in our times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, please. You was first.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I want to ask you a question about the last part of your talk, namely in how far this faculty to bring about perpetual peace can also bring about evil.
Yes.
Since I find it very interesting in Kantianism that one could say that there is no space for what we call evil, because there's no possibility to choose evil in a rational or reasonable manner, at least in moral philosophy. So when you look at the religion, it's not possible to decide yourself reasonably for evil. Evil is always a deprivation of the good, so you're following your inclinations and you don't determine yourself by the moral law. And now I always thought that the construction in bringing about perpetual peace would be parallel, so that if we're failing to do that, so we're not reasonable enough, but that we're not able to then fail in this endeavor in any reasonable way. And so what you're saying is that, and you quoted that 2 times, so the trick of nature is that it pushes commerce, it pushes competition, but I'm not sure whether it pushes warfare. So I would just like that you explain me that a little bit more, because it was a really interesting thesis. But I think so standard Kantian response would be somehow along the lines that I just give.
Okay, so I hope I picked everything correctly. So evil as a privation and good as the unbedingte Pflicht, one could say. Well, I don't know. With Kant, there are different, Kant has, I'm not sure that Kant has only one conception of evil that is necessarily privative. There is one Kant saying that, but even if we, what about the idea of radical evil? That's the absolutization of the principle of good, only with a negative predicate and not precisely not a privation. That's one thing, and I think maybe to concentrate here on perpetual peace or within this text. I think how I came, or why I brought evil in the game, the idea was, well, it is true that conflict of any perturbation of nature as harmony is a constitutive for the development of nature itself, and this conflict can be also manifested throughout an idea of evil deed or violent act. So I think maybe even if Kant doesn't speak explicitly here about evil, it's definitely this very idea of what perpetual peace suggests, that evil cannot be merely privative, but must be a ground of the actualization of good and peace. This would be my short answer to this. Yeah, and what about, okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, I have two short questions. First is probably too much technical, but I want to ask you. I'm a bit confused with the term capacity, and what is in my mind is Kant's theory of faculties, Vermögen, and then I'm thinking about how you see, because all the time you're talking about it, I think that, there is clearly Vermögen, and this is Wille, and what is the faculty beyond it is that we have rational will, and we can exercise it. So, and I'm not sure if mixing it with Aristotle is the right way. And the second question, okay, I have in mind Kant's critique of Wolff understanding of capacities, so it probably be confusing, but I want to dare to it just to ask you how you see these differences between faculty, capacity, and what sense do you see it, and what you mean in that sense, capacity, because probably it's rather kind of exercise of causality rather than capacity. And just thinking. And the second question, in one moment you said that whose capacity? So because in one moment you said that it can be exercised, you quoted Kant, only in a group, in a society. So it is some exercise of capacity of international federation, or of some state, or of individual people.
Okay. So capacity, Vermögen, yes, this is a good question. Now I think, again, there is a Vermögen as a mere rational faculty in Kant of theoretical reason, which is not tied to the conditions of its actualization. But what we again get here in the idea of perpetual peace is that precisely this Vermögen, Übung der Vernunft, is not separated from the actualization in a certain form of social life. And this is something that corresponds with, for example, what I described in Aristotle's as capacity, at least the one that we need to acquire through exercise and still not give up rational foundation. These two go together. So yes, this would be the short answer to it. If
your turn.
Because we have but we can talk about this.
I think you were first. No, me. Doesn't no. It's okay.
I don't know. I didn't see.
Yeah, you were first. Okay, whatever you want.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is a question or just further development. In any case, your presentation clarified me certain things that I wondered for a long time, and I didn't find the proper formulation. Now I think that I can, thanks to your intervention, namely perpetual. What is perpetual peace? Why the ewige freedom? And what does it do with the Ewigkeit? And then what you did is basically draw a parallel between individual history, individual personal actions, and the action, historical action of the man or Menschheit as a Gattung within history. And now we have several parallels between individual and Gattung, with politics, with ethics and politics, with history, biography, and so on. And I think that this is really revealing. Why? Because in this way, I can understand what does perpetual peace do here. Namely, it has precisely the same function as the postulate of the Unsterblichkeit der Seele in his practical philosophy. Because the idea is that we live in, let's say, imperfect world where our, not propensity, our goodness cannot be realized in finite time. This is why we must, but this must be possible. This is why we must assume that we live eternally. In the same sense, I think that this perpetual peace functions in the sense that we have, in a sense, time enough to proceed towards the regulative idea of peace. And I would say even that that helps answer your question, namely, why? Because Kant speaks of angeboren, natural, so to speak, propensity towards evil. However, this is to be understood as a self-produced propensity, a propensity that is rooted in an intelligible act. Yeah. So, self-produced. What is this self-production in the case of, let's say, Gattung? This is, again, something that is given by nature, angeboren. So, well, would... I don't know, it's not a question actually, because I agree.
It's a good
maybe
comment, I agree.
Because we're a bit over the time,
yes.
Then I would...
Maybe the last question, yeah.
The last question for you.
I'll try to be very quick. Thank you very much for really a beautiful talk, very illuminating and lucid. I have a question regarding the end. You know, you mentioned this idea of the two-way capacity.
Yeah.
My question is this, I mean, there are so many interpretations of this, but to simplify, right, given Aristotle's examples, building and destroying, right, and healing and poisoning, etc., I think you could maybe split your final sort of both the necessity of war to peace and the danger in a badly construed peace. And this is my question, right? Because one way of thinking about the two-way capacity is that one is entailed in the other, right? To know how to build is always already also to know how to destroy, but not the other way around. If you know how to build, you know how to deconstruct. If you know how to heal, you know how to poison, but not the other way around. And then you can say, so it's part of the capacity to make peace, to be able in some sense to do the opposite, to do war. It's ingrained in it, so you need it. That's a possibility. I'm just raising it for you as a question. I'm just thinking out loud. But then the other thing you suggested is that if we use it badly, your example was if it's like a fake peace, this would be analogous in that sense to somebody who doesn't really know how to build a building but pretends that he does, so he builds a building that is likely to fall apart, right? So that's a use of an untrained capacity, presenting ourselves as if we are trained but we are actually false experts, right? So I just want you to, if you have some capacity to elaborate on that.
Maybe just a short answer. Yeah, okay. The capacity can misrepresent itself. So healing can turn into poisoning, and peace can turn into war, and one mutually determines the other. But I think rather than thinking, oh, we need one opposite in order to derive, or we need a violation of a capacity in order to see what capacity is. The point is more that that a capacity is two-way. It means that even if we fail to exercise it properly, this is not the proof that our capacity, our rational capacity, is being suspended. It stays there. Failure, improper concretization is part of this, or what the capacity is, because it is not separated from its actualization, and it also it's and it also if, again, even if we failed in exercising it properly, we will be able to discern on which grounds did we do that and could continue in our exercise of, in this case, reaching perpetual peace. So this was just the idea. It's not about the opposite, it's about that the failed exercise actually reveals the rational ground upon the capacity stands and should be perpetuated in Ewigkeit, yes, in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much.